So tonight we are here for the second of 3 meetings. Last night we had a great turnout at John Gray Memorial Hall. We are here for the second night. Thank you all for coming out, and tomorrow we will be at the Breakers Civic Centre. So if you know someone who may not be able to make it tonight or did not make it tonight or last night and still want a chance to be able to see this information live or ask questions live and in person, there is one more opportunity after tonight at the Breakers Civic Centre tomorrow night. And as an added reminder, as I mentioned, the EAB is manning a table out in the front for those of you who may have questions or comments and may not want to ask them live on the floor through the roving mics that will be part of that segment. You can at any time just go and drop a question in the box, and then as part of the Q&A, if there are questions in that box, I will certainly read them out and have them answered. So for those of you who may not know, ReGen, as this project is now being referred to, is the new name given to the 9 planned facilities that will transform the way Cayman Islands handles waste. This integrated solid waste management system was determined by the Cayman Islands government and went through public consultation before being put to tender. DART was identified as the preferred bidder in 2017, and in March of this year, the government signed a 25-year contract with DART to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the new facility at the Georgetown site and remediate the current landfill. ReGen represents the Cayman Islands' first public-private partnership and paves the way for a cleaner, greener future for our whole community, something I think that we can all get behind. The environmental impact assessment process is an important aspect of this project, and the project team certainly looks forward to answering any of your questions here tonight about the environmental impacts and performance of this new facility. Because the EIA process is focused on the environmental impact and performance of the new facilities, separate studies were developed to assess the environmental impacts of the current landfill and demonstrate how remediation will make the Georgetown landfill a safe neighborhood for surrounding homes and businesses going forward. These studies are now available on the ReGen website, which is regen.ky. If you have not visited the website, I really do encourage you to do so. It is chock full of information along with all of their social media pages, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. There is a host of information on what is being planned. The environmental studies conducted as part of the EIA will form the basis of an environmental statement. The environmental statement is the final outcome of the EIA and sets the precedent for the project's environmental performance, informing final design details for the facilities ahead of permitting and operation of the facilities once it is commissioned. The environmental statement will also be subject to a public consultation period before it is finished. So there is this period for the draft terms of reference, and once the environmental statement is then made, there will be another set of public consultations. So this is just the beginning of this process. The draft terms of reference have been developed by Wood, a global leader in environmental consulting engaged by the Cayman Islands government to advise on the integrated solid waste management system with input from the project team. Once finalized, the terms of reference will act as a roadmap for the environmental studies that form the EIA. Prior to publishing, the draft terms of reference were agreed by the project's Environmental Assessment Board, which includes representatives from the Department of Environment, the Department of Environmental Health, Department of Planning, National Roads Authority, and Water Authority Cayman. And just a few house guidelines before we get into our presentations tonight. The Environmental Assessment Board, the Department of Environmental Health, DART, and environmental consultants GHD and Apec will present on the project history, project facilities, and the chapters of the draft terms of reference, followed then by the Q&A. We do ask that you hold your questions for the Q&A segment. There will be the roving microphones for you to ask the questions, or you can submit them to the EAB representatives in the entry hall. Written submissions or comments should also be submitted to EAB representatives. Ms. Gina Ebanks-Petrie, who will be one of our speakers tonight, will also speak more to how you can formally submit comments or submissions, so she will share more about that in detail when she speaks tonight. It's important to remember that the draft terms of reference public consultation is the start. It is only the start of the EIA process. Once finalized, the draft terms of reference will act as a roadmap for the environmental studies that will inform final design details for the facilities ahead of permitting and operation of the facilities once they are commissioned. With that, I do have the pleasure yet again tonight of introducing the first speaker of the night, and we are, as you can see, we are getting right to it. We want you to get all of the information from the experts and the consultants tonight. We do have some of them who are here with us in the hall. Others will have pre-recorded videos, those who are not in the island with us, but we will also have people live joining us via Zoom to be part of the Q&A segment as well. So I would like to welcome to the stage tonight Ms. Gina Ebanks-Petrie from the Environmental Assessment Board, and she will start off our presentations tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, Ruthanna. Good evening, everyone. As Ruthanna has mentioned, I'm here this evening in my capacity as the chair of the Environmental Assessment Board, and specifically to outline a bit about the process that we are currently engaged in, and to provide you with some more information about how you can provide your input to the process. And at this time, is specifically in relation to the terms of reference for the environmental impact assessment that will be carried out on the project. If I could have the first slide. Thank you. So the Environmental Assessment Board is a subcommittee of the National Conservation Council, and it's comprised of government departments and agencies who would normally have some form of regulatory remit in authorizing or approving permitting projects. The Environmental Assessment Board is project specific, so standing members of the board, obviously myself as chair, the deputy director for the Department of Environment who has responsibility for research is another standing member of the board, and the director in the Department of Planning. So we sit on all environmental assessment boards, and then the National Conservation Council appoints other members to the board depending on the subject that's being investigated as part of the environmental impact assessment. For the ReGen EIA, other members of the Environmental Assessment Board consist of representatives from the Department of Environmental Health, the National Roads Authority, and the Water Authority. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. In terms of the process that we're engaged in, just to say quickly that the EIA is governed by the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive that's been gazetted under the National Conservation Act. And this slide really is a flowchart of the process, which is detailed in the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive. As you will see from the flowchart, there are two places where public consultation is specified in the EIA directive. One is where we're at now, which is public consultation on the draft terms of reference for the environmental impact assessment. There will be a second round of public consultation once the EIA, the technical studies have been carried out, the assessment of impacts has been finalized, et cetera, and that has all been provided in summary form in the environmental statement. So the environmental statement will also be out for public consultation at a later stage when the technical studies have been completed. So please bear that in mind as well. Next slide, thank you. In terms of the role of the EAB, we are here really to provide independent review and oversight of the EIA process itself. We're going to provide technical input, and we have been doing this even through the formulation of the terms of reference, and oversight on issues that the EIA will examine. If the EAB does not have the technical expertise in-house to address certain specific questions that the EIA might raise, we do employ independent technical consultants to supplement the technical knowledge of the EAB team. In this case, so far we have used government's technical consultants, Wood, to supply us with expertise in the area of air quality and noise. The deadline for you to provide your input to the Environmental Assessment Board and the project team on the terms of reference is Monday, the 21st of June. So please take note of that. We're asking for any comments and input you may have by that date. The draft TOR, there is a copy here available tonight, but they're also available on the DOE's website and the National Conservation Council's website. And the addresses are just there on the screen. In terms of how you can get that feedback to us, there are a number of options. If you are ready to provide your input after you've heard all the presentations this evening, please do submit your questionnaires, which are available at the desk at the front tonight. We will take them from you tonight if you're able to give them to us. Otherwise, you can email them to us at the email address there, which will come straight to the DOE. Post your input to us at the DOE's post office box, also provided there, or hand deliver them to our office on North Sound Road. Either option will work for us. We just want to hear from you. After we've had your feedback, all of the comments that we receive will be reviewed by both the Environmental Assessment Board and the technical consultancy team for the EIA. And the terms of reference, the draft terms of reference, will then be updated based on the input from the public. Final terms of reference are going to be published, and in addition to that, all of the consultation feedback and responses will be appended. Please note that we're not going to attribute comments or feedback to individuals. So please feel free to give us your input as candidly as you desire. Final terms of reference, once they've been finalized, you'll be able to find those also on the DOE's website and the Conservation Council's website. That's really all that I have to say this evening. I'm going to turn the meeting over now to the technical team who are going to take you through the specifics of the project. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Gina. Next up, I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Richard Sims, who is the Director for the Department of Environmental Health, and he will also present to you for a few minutes. Yeah. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Richard Sims.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out to be here this evening, to get as much information about this EIA that we are actually sharing with you. Before pressing on, I would like to acknowledge a few people. My Chief Officer, Mr. Nelly Pucci, who is the Acting Chief Officer for the Ministry of Health, and also Mr. Cameron Graham, President of DART Development, and also Chief Officer Jennifer Hearn. She's around. Some of you will probably be familiar with her. She was once in charge of overseeing this project. First slide. All right, just to give you a little bit of background as to where we're coming from. That's my goal here this evening, to ensure that you understand a little bit of history of the Department of Environmental Health, where we're coming from, where we're at, and where we're going. So since the 1970s, the landfill started in its current form. And it's been quite some time now. When you think about it, over 40 years, almost 50 years of landfilling has been going on in the Cayman Islands. And it started without proper leachate management and all these other things, no lining. And it's now at its peak at 90 feet above sea level. And when you look at it now, it's reached its capacity. We're looking at another 5 years maximum, I think, that we'll have on the current site. So it's time to move on to a new style of operation. So the landfill, it includes 70 acres of land, which 30 acres of it contains material below grade. Now, the ReGen operation, what we're trying to do is we'll turn the landfill into green waste. A green space built with state-of-the-art modern infrastructure, which include improving recycling and turning our waste into power. So think about that for now. We're just landfilling at the moment. And now we'll have a proper solution that will deliver our waste into something useful and turn it into energy. Next slide. What are the current practices that the Department of Environmental Health are doing right now? We are responsible for collecting and disposing of waste, right? We receive about 90 to 100,000 tons of waste every year at the landfill. Some separation do go on currently. We're separating out plastics, number 1 and 2 plastics that have been packaged and prepared for recycling overseas. We're separating metals, cardboards, and glass, right? But we have limited hauling that is done by the private sector. That's more on the commercial side. But the Department of Environmental Health is responsible solely for the collection of residential waste. The site, as I just mentioned, is currently is not lined, and there's no proper leachate treatment in place. But with this current system that we're looking at implementing, we'll take care of all of that. All the concerns about leachate and stuff, we will certainly take care of that in many respects. We cannot continue with the same form that we're doing. Because when you look at the costs in terms of the material required to cover the landfill each day, as you will look around the island now, there's a lot of construction going on, so there's a lot of demand for fill, and the prices are constantly going up, so it's becoming a very expensive venture, and we just simply cannot continue on this path. Currently, we're trying to make a paradigm shift from the current disposal systems to maximize diversion from the landfill, energy recovery from a combustible material, because there are things that we realize that can be used. And the thing is, we have to look at our model of reducing, reuse, recycling, recover, and dispose of stuff. So we want to minimize the landfill disposal requirements. So this facility will be built to the highest standard, to the European standard, which is the highest we can possibly get. And the ReGen facility is already going to be built in an area right there at the landfill where it's currently at. So we're not taking it into another district or anywhere else. So it'll be done right there. It's already zoned heavy industrial area. And we have also not agreed, CUC has agreed in principle, even though we have not yet reached the point where a price has been reached in terms of what they will buy the power for, but in principle, it has been agreed that they will take the power once the site is up and running. Now, just going to take you a little bit back to from where this project started to now and where we're going to be heading come 2024. So in 2014, the government consulted experts to identify waste management solution for the Cayman Islands. So at that time, people were complaining, listen, we need to do something about the dump. Something needs to happen. We cannot continue on like this. So the government consulted some experts. Those experts came up with a solution that waste to energy is the way forward. So in 2015, the public consultation began for the ISRIM project. In 2016, the National Waste Management Strategy outline business case was approved, saying this is the way forward. The waste to energy is the way to do it. In 2016, the tender process began for the ISWIM contract, and in 2017, the government announced that DART was the preferred bidder for this project. In 2018, the technical refine period, scrap metal recycling began. So that operation, this is where all the metals, scrap metals that's coming into the landfill, plus end-of-life vehicles, ELVs we call them, were being depolluted, crushed, stocked, prepared, and shipped off island. So that began in 2018 and still ongoing and will continue on throughout the time when this project is scheduled to be completed in 2024. In 2020, government approved DART to begin to remediate the landfill. As you drive across the Estella Tibbetts Highway, you'll notice that the covering has been going on. That's just the first regulating layer that you see there. So there's a lot more left to do to make sure that it is covered properly. Making sure that everything is environmentally sound during this process. And in 2020-21, here we are now, commencing the environmental impact assessment, for which you are now taking part. In 2022, the remediation of the north mount of the Georgetown landfill is scheduled to be completed. In 2022, construction of the facilities, which my counterpart will be explaining to you those facilities in a few minutes, so you can understand what their makeup will be. And in 2023, the legacy cleanup to complete the residual waste landfill construction. So if when you drive across the landfill now, you'd see a stack of metals. That's what we call the legacy waste. And it will take some time to clean that up, but as you'll notice that a lot of it has been disappearing. We removed approximately 6,000 tons of metals within the last couple of weeks. There are 3 barges have been left our ports, which is good. So we're seeing some great results in that area. And by the end in 2024, we're hoping to have the keys for this facility, to have it up and running in 3 years' time. So that's it in a nutshell from us. And if you have any questions, like has been mentioned by our Ms. Rutana, you can have questions at the end. We can answer those for you. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sims. Now I'd like to invite the other Richard to the stage. So we had Richard Sims. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Richard Mackery, who is the DART EIA project lead for this particular project. Welcome to the stage, Mr. Richard Mackery.
Thank you, Ruthana. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. It's great to have the opportunity to come and speak to you tonight. DART's obviously a strategic partner in this project, and the important aspect of it is a partnership. It's a large project, the largest certainly of its kind in Cayman at the moment, and it's taken some time to develop and get to this point, and it was very exciting to witness the project agreement signing earlier on the year in March. First of its kind as a public-private partnership on the island, so that makes it quite unique. It has and presents its own challenges, but I'm delighted to say that both CIG and the DART consortium project team have brought some amazing skills and expertise throughout the project, both in its design and procurement. And now as we roll into the environmental impact assessment and the development, hopefully future development of this quite transformational project and the infrastructure associated with it. As has been mentioned, DART is here as part of the project partner, to design, build, finance and maintain the new facilities. Operations, as you'll see in a later slide, are split between DART and DEH, and that's quite an important and innovative part of it. And of course, Grand Cayman being Grand Cayman, and the history of the landfill, as Mr. Sims articulated, is almost just as important, the remediation of that aspect to the population here as the new infrastructure. So it truly is a win-win process with regards to the remediation of the landfill, or the dump as it's locally known, and the development of new state-of-the-art technology. So what are we building? There's a lot of focus around the energy recovery facility. That's where a lot of the questions seem to be asked. And it is, of course, the largest element of this integrated waste infrastructure. But it's not the only element. In fact, it's one of a 9-piece jigsaw that combined really do provide the opportunity to divert, as the slide shows, up to 95% of our waste away from landfill and that bottom line of the waste hierarchy, and integrate an approach that will allow evolution of waste management and resource recovery on the island for many years to come. So the slide depicts these 9 elements of waste infrastructure. The colour coding is the ones in white will be operated by DART, and the ones in grey will be operated by the DEH team. So over and above the energy recovery, and I hope you've had a chance to have a look at the information boards and possibly the little animation video out in the foyer. As I said, is the largest element. That will be receiving the majority of black bag waste, household waste, commercial waste, to go through a mass burn combustion process. Like in any industrial process, there are always byproducts. On the back end of energy from waste facility, there's 2 key elements. One is bottom ash. Now, this is, for all intents and purposes, an inert material, which in its own right can be utilised as an aggregate. And we also then have the opportunity to pull out the metals within that aggregate in the form of aluminium and steel, which will be combined with the other scrap metals and exported for recycling. Construction demolition waste, or construction and deconstruction waste, as was highlighted to me, and I think is a great term, presents a great opportunity for us to do significantly increased recycling for this quite heavy waste feedstock, separating out the aggregate materials, the bricks, the broken concrete, etc., the steel, the aluminium, the door frames, the window frames, and then those higher value materials, again, things like copper wiring and circuit boards and things like that. So this allows us to really push forward with much more intricate segregation of waste materials to allow a significant increase in our recycling performance. I'm going to come back to the residual waste landfill last, because that is a very important element of it as well. But we then have the end-of-life vehicle and scrap metal recycling. Once again, as Mr. Sims, you will all have undoubtedly seen the lodged stockpile of scrap metals as you drive down the ETH. And, this is something that there's a legacy stockpile that we're dealing with in the immediate future through an independent contract that will essentially be resolving that problem by 2023. And of course, then, as an island, we do continue to import a significant number of vehicles, which will require ongoing management. So there will be an ongoing vehicle depollution facility. Those vehicles, once they've been had the oils and the fuel and the batteries stripped out of them, can then be processed and crushed and baled, and once again exported for recycling, along with the other metals being collected on the island. The material recovery facility, well, that really focuses around our plastics, our plastics 1 and 2, our paper and cardboard, our aluminium cans, steel cans, the more typical household or commercial recyclables that I hope most of you bring to the bring banks and the car parks. This facility will allow the expansion of recycling on the island in forms yet to be determined, but at least it presents a capacity opportunity in the future from a bring bank perspective, or potentially even a household perspective. Those are, of course, decisions that will be made by DEH and the government, aligned with the waste strategy. Green waste processing, there is a significant amount of green waste through landscaping generated on the island. We find that the green waste, the makeup of this feedstock can be quite fibrous, and isn't always particularly suitable for traditional compost. But this facility will essentially allow for mulching of those more fibrous or woody type materials, and then ongoing composting in a more traditional format in windrows, which we hope will support future agriculture, home gardening, lots of aspects for soil improvement across the island. Household waste recycling, you may or may not have been to the dump, but of course there is the Household Waste Recycling Centre where you can bring your typically oversized materials, waste materials, and indeed, in some cases, certainly reusable materials to the household waste recycling for segregation. This operation will be expanded. There'll be clarity around what bins, what materials go into those bins, on the basis that hopefully a lot more of those materials can be recycled. And if they aren't recycled, at least they're not going to landfill, but they've been segregated as fuel for the energy recovery facility. The medical waste processing facility, well, there is currently a medical waste incinerator located on the landfill site, dealing with hospital waste. It also deals with contraband, police seizures and things like that, so be it drugs or money or things like that. So it's a very important piece of infrastructure in the overall scheme of things. That particular facility will be replaced with a new medical waste incinerator, which will be continued to be operated by DEH. And then finally, the residual waste landfill. You know, it is important for people to understand that landfill, irrespective of your integrated waste infrastructure and the other elements, is a requirement, and it's an important requirement ongoing on the island. The first thing to say is the residual waste landfill will be fully lined, so it will have a basal liner. Materials in that will not have the opportunity to generate leachate for the broader environment or any off-site exposures of that material. It's also going to have a transition to a different material type, with many of the materials going in there of a more inert nature. One aspect will certainly be the other byproduct of energy from waste, which is a fly ash collected through the air pollution control system, a very advanced system, which will be collected. It will be blended and mixed with concrete, and for all intents and purposes set in that concrete and immobilized from the environment. The other aspect is Cayman obviously does regrettably suffer from hurricanes and major storm events, and those events can generate significant volumes of waste in a short period of time that DEH have to manage quickly. So they need to have the capability to manage those wastes, bring them to a central location, stored in a safe location, with the ability then for future segregation, either through the energy recovery facility or for recycling. So it plays in a very important role in the overall integrated waste infrastructure. The cruise liner view of where we're hoping to get to, two landmarks, you may say, from a visual aspect of Grand Cayman. On the left, we see an artist's impression of where we hope to get to as a green mind with regards to the remediation, closure, capping of the existing landfill. And to the right, we have a render of the energy recovery facility. We'll certainly hope to be given a bit of a paint job as things go forward, and prettying it up, hopefully letting it blend into the environment as best we can. It's approximately the size of a 10-story building, so that's by far and away the largest element of infrastructure as part of the ReGen project. So a hugely improved view, whether you're on island or off island, looking back, and of course the environmental controls that go along with that, particularly with regards to the closure of the landfill and what will be discussed by our consultants as part of the EIA for the new infrastructure. So the ERF, it's principally there as a waste disposal methodology. That has to be said, but a very important element of it is the fact that it has the ability to generate 9.3 megawatts of electricity that can be exported to the grid. So representing approximately 10% of the requirements of Grand Cayman. It's not insignificant. It's a well-proven technology. There are many, many plants of this nature across the world, UK, Europe, the States, currently being built in Australia, multiple jurisdictions. So it's robust, it's reliable, and it's proven. And the important aspect of it is, the front end is about the combustion and the management of waste safely. The back end is about air pollution control management. As Mr. Sims mentioned, this facility will be operating to the highest global standards, which are currently the Industrial Emission Directive and best available techniques. So essentially what that means is it will be designed, built, operated with the current best available techniques known to this industry. So collectively, what does this mean to the Cayman community? Well, sustainable power is an important aspect of that. I can't claim that those 9.3 megawatts can all be claimed as sustainable. They won't, but they are certainly, we can claim about 50% of those, which is predicated against the US model. But nevertheless, we're utilizing waste to generate energy, which is offsetting the utilization of fossil fuels in the form of diesel power. As I mentioned, they are modern facilities. They are state-of-the-art. It's not old technology. It will absolutely deliver as it's designed. We're reducing emissions, landfill closure and remediation, and the implementation of the gas management system in its own right essentially reduces our greenhouse gas emissions and methane emissions from the site, equivalent to taking about 5,000 cars off the road in Grand Cayman, which is quite a significant figure. The RF in its own right, yes, it will produce carbon dioxide, but it does not produce methane, which is has a much higher order of greenhouse gas severity. Protecting health, absolutely across the project team, be it the government or the DART consortium, environmental health, protecting health and managing the infrastructure that it is safe for the environment and human health going forward is absolutely paramount to this project. So it's obviously a key aspect within the EIA and the independent review of that. But I can absolutely assure you as a partnership, it's a very, very important element of how the facilities have been designed and developed and hope to be put into place in the future. Recycling, I know it's a very common theme, recycling, and what are the impacts on recycling? Well, like so many aspects of this, like the EIA, it's the start of a journey. It's generating infrastructure that will undoubtedly support significant improvement recycling on the island going forward from where we are at the moment. It's critical to have that infrastructure to collect, segregate and manage recycling materials, and the ReGen infrastructure will certainly be able to do that. The green space, as you've seen in the artist's impression with regards to the closure of the landfill and that becoming a green space, reducing landfill, well, absolutely, as I've said, the infrastructure allows us to drive towards 95% diversion from landfill, which is fantastic in its own right. And of course, we can't forget the economic impact. Two aspects of that. The project itself will allow us to generate approximately 300 construction jobs. Yes, those are short-term, but they are important. Nevertheless, the ongoing development of the country from an employment perspective. But on a long-term basis, what it does allow to do is to maintain DEH jobs and redeployment, training, upskilling opportunities as the DEH transitions from a landfill operation to the 4 elements of infrastructure that they'll be managing going forward. And then approximately 30, 35 new jobs, new long-term jobs, skilled operational jobs in the operation of the infrastructure going forward for this 25-year contract. That is the contract period between the government and DART once we get into an operational phase. But for infrastructure that after that 25-year period gets handed back to the government and has a future life actually out to 40 years with scheduled maintenance. So it does generate significant socioeconomic impact. It generates learning opportunities, an education centre, and I think, and certainly as I've seen previously on projects of this nature, spawns an exciting new development with regards to sustainable waste management on the island and how that plays out in broader sustainability. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Our next series of presentations will come in the way of pre-recorded videos for the experts and consultants that are overseas. So these experts are a combined set of representatives from GHD and Apec environmental consultants. So the videos will just continue to play, and by virtue of the videos, they will introduce themselves. Once we've made it through these series of videos and this information, we will then transition into our Q&A segment.
Hi, I'm Blair Schonecker, Senior Environmental Planner with GHD. And we're working with APEC on this environmental impact assessment. And we represent a number of different technical disciplines, including those that you see here on the screen. And we'll be completing the EIA in accordance with the draft terms of reference that are currently out for public consultation. Let's talk about the environmental impact assessment methodology. There are 3 main steps to the methodology. Step 1 is the identification of baseline conditions. Step 2 is a determination of the potential effects on the environment and a significance evaluation of the residual effects. And step 3 is an assessment of cumulative effects. In terms of step 1, in order to determine the baseline conditions that should be used for the assessment of the potential likely significant effects of the proposed development, it is necessary to determine the current baseline conditions and then decide whether these conditions are likely to change. In the subsequent slides, each of the technical disciplines will provide an overview of their baseline conditions documented to date in the draft terms of reference, which will be augmented and modified as necessary as part of drafting the environmental statement. Each technical discipline will also review their study area or zone of influence, which are important to determine baseline conditions. We need to look at the zone of influence and study areas from both a temporal, which is a time or duration, as well as a spatial, the general area that a project effect may range. With respect to step 2 and the significance evaluation, this is where the project team first predict the potential effects of the project components and activities on the broad definition of the environment. The team will use the baseline information and existing conditions that have been collected as part of step 1 in conjunction with how the project will be constructed and operated and interact with the environment in order to determine potential effects. For example, how might the construction of the project affect the landscape or change the views for existing residents? An important piece of this step is to detail and determine mitigation measures to reduce or eliminate or control potential effects. The project team will review each of the potential effects and apply mitigation measures to determine the remaining net or residual effects of the project. After this, the project team will determine the significance of the residual effects using a number of criteria, including what's the magnitude of the effect, the duration, the frequency, and the geographic extent. The significance criteria are all documented in our draft terms of reference. Finally, step 3 moves us to the assessment of cumulative effects. And what do we mean by cumulative effects? Well, a cumulative effects assessment looks at the potential interaction between the proposed project in combination with other existing or reasonably foreseeable projects or activities that may be developed in the future. How might there be some overlap between our proposed project and any existing projects in the area or future projects? And what are those effects? The cumulative effects are documented in the environmental statement along with the baseline conditions and the significance evaluation. We're at the first stage of the environmental impact assessment process with much work to be completed by the technical team. As mentioned, all of the work completed in the 3 steps I've outlined tonight will be documented in the environmental statement. The environmental statement will then be provided to the public and government agencies for review and comment for a 21-day period. I'm now going to hand it over to each of the technical disciplines who are going to run through their slides with respect to the different components of the environment that will be reviewed as part of the environmental impact assessment.
Hello, my name is Laura Lawler and I'm a senior ecologist with GHD. With respect to the terrestrial ecology component of the EIA evaluation for the isthmus, we're referring to both the plants and animals that may be using the current property and surrounding areas. As with many of the other components of the EIA, we work through a 3-stage process for the evaluation. The first is to characterize the baseline conditions. Secondarily, we move on to the potential receptors, and then we complete it with an evaluation of effects after characterizing the likely significant effects. At this stage, from a terrestrial ecology perspective, the baseline condition information that we have is that the site has been filled previously to raise the land level and is a disturbed and primarily developed site. From the terrestrial ecology perspective, what this means is that there's little to no natural habitat remaining across the property. The further characterization of what is there and as far as habitat goes, as far as plant species go, and animal use of the site is what we'll explore through the EIA. The surrounding areas are primarily developed. We have the Georgetown landfill to the northeast of the site and a combination of other industrial and commercial developments nearby. To the west, immediately west of the site, there is a mangrove wetland area that is located between the Esterly-Tibbetts Highway and the property. So this will be one of those key areas that we'll be considering as part of our characterization of the baseline terrestrial ecology. As far as moving on to the ecological receptors component, we take a look at both what's on and immediately around the site, as well as any of those features that have been identified within the study area that may have international importance. In this circumstance, on the slide here, you can see that we've identified that distance to be a distance of 12 kilometers from the site. There are 2 locations that have been identified as potential consideration for international importance, noted here as the Central Mangrove Wetlands and Breakers Wetlands, pardon me. We'll be taking a look at those to evaluate whether they may be receptors that may be influenced or affected by this proposed development. When we consider the likelihood of significant effects, or the likely types of significant effects on the terrestrial ecology, we will be considering items from temporary disturbance, such as vehicle traffic for the development of the facility. We'll be considering longer term items that are both during the construction or the operation phase of earthworks moving, of noise and visual disturbance, seasonal type disturbances to fauna in particular and their use of the site, as well as any long-term considerations for the operation of the facility on those identified ecological features and receptors. The marine ecology component of the EIA for the Isthmus follows a similar process to the other components. We begin with an identification and characterization of the baseline conditions, proceed to an identification of potential receptors based on the results of that initial characterization, and complete the evaluation with an assessment of the likely significant effects on those identified receptors. As you are, I'm sure, aware, the Cayman Islands are blessed with a wealth of diverse marine habitats, from the fringe and outer reefs to the near coastal mangrove wetlands and the seagrass beds. There's a wide diversity of habitats available for many marine species. The fish, mollusks, mammals, and reptiles of the surrounding area, be they resident or migratory species, offer combinations of biodiversity, commercial, and recreational tourism value. Extensive characterization of the marine habitats and species used have been completed by the Department of Environment and National Trust and other entities over the years. When considering the potential receptors, we first start by looking at the variety of protected areas that have been identified around Grand Cayman. You can see here on this figure, there are a number of those areas identified. Also important to note at this point is a reminder that the site that we're talking about for the Isthmus is an upland site and does not have any currently proposed development along the coastline. As such, the potential receptors will include consideration of those identified protected areas, as well as effects to both resident and migratory marine species. When we look at the likely significant effects, we again are reminded that the potential effects that are expected from this upland development on the marine environment are limited to indirect effects and are expected to be present through either runoff from the site, so rainwater on the site and overland flow into the marine areas, or through transmission through groundwater. You can see here we've noted some of the initial likely effects that have been identified for both the construction and operation periods that again focus on that indirect potential for exposure to marine habitats and wildlife from the site development.
This section deals with the surface water hydrology, including flood risks, as well as groundwater geohydrology conditions at the site. The main standards governing this section include Directive of Environmental Impact Assessment, issued in accordance with the National Conservation Law of 2013, the Water Authority Act of 2018. Water quality standards for the EIA will also be determined in consultation with the Department of Environment, Water Authority, and Department of Environmental Health, taking into account international and regional standards as appropriate. With regards to baseline conditions, a desk study relating to hydrology and hydrogeology and flood risk data was carried out as part of the TOR. It is expected that other data will be collected during the formulation of the EIA. This may include further published data and additional field monitoring information relating to water level, flow, and quality as deemed necessary. Groundwater under the development site has been the subject of previous studies by the Cayman Island government and their consultants. There are no known groundwater users in the immediate vicinity of the project. However, there are a number of groundwater abstraction operations nearby. MRCU canals extend east of the Estuary Teviot's Highway and north of the Georgetown landfill. Ongoing water quality monitoring by the Department of Environment and the Water Authority of the surface water in the area is ongoing. No mapped floodplains exist for the Cayman Islands. However, the Cayman Island government had previously compiled flood data based on field observation in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan. The proposed site is within an area of high exposure to hurricanes and associated storm surge. The potential receptors to be evaluated as part of the EI include water environment, groundwater users, and human properties and infrastructure within the adjacent areas. A review of likely significant hydrology and hydrogeology effects during construction and operation are recommended for assessment during the formulation of the EIA. Other likely significant effects may also be identified as required. A number of studies are anticipated to be carried out in support of the EIA as necessary. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jo Steele and I work at GHD as a Principal Consultant in the Land Contamination Assessment and Remediation team. The Environmental Impact Assessment will consider the effects on land quality. Initially, the baseline conditions are evaluated. We know the land has been previously developed and comprises made ground over the natural geology. There are historical legacy contaminants also present at the site, for example, the lined and capped ash pit that contains burn materials from Hurricane Ivan. The natural karst geology may cause land stability problems due to the potential for subsurface voids. During the environmental impact assessment, changes to the baseline land quality condition will be assessed for the construction and operation of the project. Land contamination sources and land stability impacts will be evaluated. This would include the potential for contamination from the future composting activities and storage of materials, for example. In addition, an assessment will be completed to understand geotechnical constraints. Once the significance of the impacts is understood, mitigation measures can be designed for implementation during construction and operation of the integrated solid waste management system. Thank you.
Next, we're going to talk about the landscape and visual impact assessment. And this is going to be undertaken in accordance with the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment. That's produced by the Landscape Institute and the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. And this is a widely regarded tool and methodology used by the landscape and planning professions as an industry standard for providing landscape and visual assessment inputs into environmental impact assessments that are undertaken for all types of developments. So what do we mean when we talk about visual impact assessment? Well, this is defined as an assessment of landscape effects, deals with the effects of change and development on landscape as a resource. The concern is with how the proposal will affect the elements that make up the landscape, the aesthetic, and perceptual aspects of the landscape and its distinctive character. So this includes direct effects on the landscape elements within the integrated solid waste management site, and direct and indirect effects upon landscape, townscape, and seascape character, and any landscape or townscape designations within the landscape and visual impact assessment study area. An important piece of the landscape and visual impact assessment relates to receptors. So the term visual receptors is used in the landscape and visual impact assessment, and that includes people with views from their residential properties, local communities, transportation routes, along with people undertaking outdoor formal and informal recreational activities. And that could range from walking along the beach to people playing golf or undertaking recreational activities off western coast of Grand Cayman. Specific effects will arise from changes in the factors related to a visual receptor's view generated by both the construction and operation of the proposed integrated solid waste management site. The preliminary study area that's going to be used for the landscape and visual impact assessment extends approximately 3 kilometers from the site boundary, as you can see on the slide. And this study area has been used for the purposes of data collection and the subsequent assessment to ensure that the landscape and visual impact assessment concentrates on those receptors that are most likely to be significantly affected by the proposed site. From a baseline perspective, the site has been disturbed previously, and it contains no naturally occurring features. And in common with large parts of Grand Cayman, the proposed site has a ground level height that is only a few meters above sea level as a result of the geology of the site. The site's also located in an area that is zoned as heavy industrial, and so it's bound to the east and the south by other heavy industrial land uses. A number of specific groups of visual receptors have been identified in the desktop studies completed to date. And that includes pupils and staff at the Cayman International School to the northwest, residents and properties located surrounding the site, and also recreational receptors playing golf, a blue tip golf course, recreational receptors visiting the Camana Bay Observation Tower, and tourists on boats in the North Sound or sailing off 7 Mile Beach. The likely significant landscape and visual effects that will be taken forward for assessment include construction activities by the temporary presence of cranes, which may alter the views and visual amenity of sensitive visual receptors, and then the presence of operational aspects of the site, which again may alter the views and visual amenity of sensitive receptors. So the assessment is going to be based on a viewpoint assessment of up to 8 publicly accessible viewpoints, including the Camana Bay Observation Tower, which will represent the views of the groups that I previously mentioned. The sensitivity of visual receptors will consider the susceptibility of the visual receptor to the visual change that's identified and the value that is likely to be attributed by the visual receptor to their baseline view.
Hello, my name is Tom Ferrara, and I'm a senior air quality scientist at GHD. I'm here today to talk about the air quality and greenhouse gas impact assessment for the proposed project. The first step in the impact assessment is to evaluate the baseline conditions at the site. Since there is limited air quality data available for Grand Cayman, we will be collecting air quality data of the existing conditions in a monitoring station located downwind of the proposed project location. The figure at the bottom right shows existing sources that are in the area, industrial sources that are near the facility, and the emissions of these facilities will be captured in this monitoring, so they will be included in the baseline conditions. The next step in the project will be to estimate the emissions from the proposed project. These emissions basically come in 2 broad categories, and the table in the slide shows there'll be construction emissions and operations emissions. The construction emissions are short-term in that when the project is completed, the construction operations will stop. And so they're generally short-term, and they will consist mainly of dust generated in earth-moving activities and combustion emissions from vehicle, diesel generators, diesel, earth-moving equipment, etc. The second aspect of the emissions is the operational aspect, which is ongoing for the life of the project. And that will also consist of some dust, particulate matter, from material handling operations and landfill operations. There will be combustion emissions from the energy recovery facility, the medical waste incinerator, and again, combustion emissions from vehicles used on site and vehicles coming to and from the site. So those emissions will all need to be estimated, and all the different chemical parameters estimated for each of those sources. The last step in the process is to use computer modeling to take the emissions from the sources and distribute it downwind to the receptors. Also in the figure, you can see a windrose, which shows that the wind direction is primarily from the northeast towards the southwest, and that's the prevailing wind across the site. So the area of most impact will be in the southeast of the facility. The types of receptors that we intend to evaluate are residential receptors, recreational areas, and then a special case is sensitive receptors. And sensitive receptors include schools and daycare centers, healthcare facilities, and retirement communities. These types of facilities represent the young, the old, and people with health issues that are more sensitive to air pollution. All of the impacts will be assessed with respect to the applicable air quality standards for the project, and then those are to be established. I think at this point, if there's any questions, I'd be glad to respond to them. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mike Michelli. I'm with GHD. I'm in charge of our Noise and Vibration Services group, and I've been with GHD for 15 years now. As part of this project, it's always important to evaluate what the baseline conditions are for noise and vibration to establish what the pre-project noise levels are, and then compare them to the anticipated impacts from construction and then eventual operation of the facility. GHD notes that a baseline sound monitoring study was conducted in 2014 in the area at several areas around the facility, which include sensitive receptors such as residential homes, schools, and any places of worship that are applicable. GHD anticipates revisiting the baseline by conducting more monitoring at sensitive receptors around the proposed facility. The anticipated background noise is most likely due to road traffic noise, which is elevated during the day, and then the quieter ambient environment during the night. GHD also anticipates that vibration from construction will not be immediately perceived outside the construction area due to separation distance and local soil conditions. As part of the baseline evaluation, we will evaluate what the levels are during the day and during the night for comparison to construction and operational noise impacts. As part of the operational noise evaluation, GHD will create a 3D acoustical model, which will have components of every piece of noise generating equipment from the facility, and then we'll model that out to the sensitive receptors. This acoustical model takes into consideration intervening structures that may block the noise based on line of sight. It also takes into account site-specific parameters such as a grassy area absorbing the sound versus asphalt, which may reflect the sound more. This model allows us to determine what each piece of equipment contributes to each sensitive receptor, determine the cumulative noise impact from all the equipment operating together, and then allows us to evaluate if we need to retender a low noise piece of equipment or mitigate a piece of mechanical equipment, either by a silencer, acoustical enclosure, or an acoustic barrier wall if required on some of the equipment. This will all be part of GHD's noise and vibration evaluation.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Murphy and I'm a civil engineer with Apec Consulting Engineers, and we will be working on the traffic and transportation portion of the EIA. Apec is a Cayman Islands-based multidisciplinary practice, and I've been working with the firm since 2003. Apec has worked with the National Roads Authority on numerous transportation projects since its creation in 2004. We've prepared several traffic impact assessment reports in accordance with the NRA's requirements, both on behalf of the authority and private developers. The EIA will include a section on traffic and transportation. This assessment will be carried out in accordance with the NRA's guidelines as well as general industry standards. A baseline will be established outlining current traffic flows in the vicinity of the proposed waste management facility. This will be prepared using existing traffic data obtained from the NRA and augmented with traffic counts at key locations. Using this data, near-term and medium-term traffic forecasts will be determined, both with and without the proposed facility. This will determine what impact the new development will have on the surrounding transportation infrastructure.
Our last technical discipline for review and discussion this evening is around socioeconomic. So the assessment of socioeconomic effects will consider the way in which the proposed development will affect people's way of life, their community, economic activity, and culture. And it's envisaged that the proposed development will result in the creation of significant additional employment opportunities. In addition to securing direct employment opportunities at the site, we also envision that a number of indirect and induced jobs will be supported because of the need to service the site. Typically, these relate to the provision of a wide variety of goods and services, including specialist engineering assistance for maintenance and contractors for services. Some considerations around the effect that the proposed development may have on tourism is one aspect that will be reviewed as part of the socioeconomic technical discipline. Specifically, the receptors to be assessed as part of this discipline include existing local employers and potential future businesses. And that relates to sites that are being marketed for occupation or allocated under an existing development plan. In short, the socioeconomic assessment will be primarily concerned about the effect on things like the change to the local employment structure, an effect on the local employment market, employment opportunities and displacement, an increased or decreased local expenditure, new and improved facilities, and the effects on the quality of life enjoyed by the local population. The potential socioeconomic and community receptors that have been identified as part of the draft terms of reference include an employment base, so the local population that falls within that 16 to 65 age group, and that includes both temporary and permanent employment, and the existing business. So in the context of the retention of existing indirect and induced employment benefits, and in particular, consideration of the wider effects on the island's tourism industry. And the significance on this particular discipline is going to be determined using some clearly defined qualitative criteria that we've described in the draft terms of reference. And that includes the sensitivity of socioeconomic receptors, so individuals or social or economic groups. And that'll be determined by their vulnerability to change or ability to take advantage of opportunities. And also the magnitude of impacts, and that'll be determined by an effect on receptors, well-being, which refers to financial, physical, and emotional conditions of people or groups. All of this information will be documented in the environmental statement, and the application of mitigation measures will be applied to this particular technical discipline.